Professional Scrum with Richard Hundhausen.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host. Make sure to check out www.azuredevops.show for past episodes and show notes. And a lot of user groups are getting me on their calendar on my open invitation to speak virtually at .NET user groups that are doing everything through video. It's a lot of fun. If you run a .NET related user group, I'd love to get on your presentation schedule. And so hit me up, send me an email, tweet, or otherwise get in contact with the show. I'm pretty easy to find. And if you're tuning in for the first time, the Azure DevOps Podcast is for Microsoft-centric developers shipping software with Microsoft technology, and we go wherever that takes us. And my goal for all development teams is for them to be able to move fast, deliver quality, and run their systems with confidence. So today on the show, we have a good friend and amazing software engineer and trainer, Richard Hundhausen, normally helps software organizations and teams deliver better products by understanding and leveraging Azure DevOps and Scrum. He's a professional Scrum trainer, professional Scrum developer. He's an author of Professional Scrum with Azure DevOps from Microsoft Press. He's the co-creator of the Nexus Scaled Scrum framework. And as a software developer and consultant with over 30 years of experience, he does understand that software is built and delivered by people and not by processes or tools. Richard, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Hey, Jeffrey. Thanks for having me. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Everyone's staying healthy, so couldn't ask for more. You know, you've been doing training for so long. I remember I took one of your training classes up in Boston. So I can vouch for the density of jokes per minute.
Any value per minute or just jokes?
That was a good class. It was a good class. But you know, there's you've been around for a lot, and so many people already know who you are. But maybe for those listeners who are just getting to know you for the first time, how would you describe your background? What kind of led you to this, and you know, you're doing mostly training and helping clients be good development organizations now. But what are the highlights of your background? Kind of give us an introduction.
Sure. So I was one of these geeks who had the personal computer. I won't tell you what make or model it was in my basement, and sort of self-taught myself to program when I was a teenager, and figured out you could start making money. You know, back in the 80s and early 90s. I realized I could speak to other developers. I had a way to kind of connect with them, and realized that I had a knack to do training for developers, because the recipe is pretty simple. Tell them a few things they don't already know, show them where to get more information like sample code, get their problem solved, aka Stack Overflow, how Google works, things like that, and then just shut up and let them work with it. And that's kind of the real simple recipe I've just repeated year after year. And it keeps me, you know, working with dev teams, teaching them technology, teaching them tools. In the early 2000s, I'd already co-authored a couple of books, some study guides for some of the certification exams for Microsoft, and co-authored a book on ADO.NET and XML web services, because, you know, .NET was just exploding in every direction at the speed of light. And then I realized I was kind of interested in this thing called Visual Studio Enterprise Architect Edition. It was this really super expensive version of Visual Studio that did a lot of things people didn't understand. So I approached Microsoft Press about writing a book. Like, the title was going to be something like, "You just spent a lot of money, what do you get for it?" And they said, "No, not so interested. How about a book on Visio?" And I'm like, "What? Visio? That's the thing where you design landscaping projects, isn't it?" So he said, "Well, hold on." This is the editor at the time. He said, "Hold on, there's something codenamed Burton coming down the pipeline. which turned out to be Team Foundation Server, Visual Studio, Team System, VSTS, the first VSTS back in the day. And then from then on, I was more interested in SDLC, ALM, and eventually DevOps, sort of the tools and the processes around delivering software, and less around writing code myself.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, and you've spoken about this before, part of the ALM story is having some process the team follows. And there are different flavors of Agile. I see Agile as an abstract interface that a lot of teams can implement that as Scrum or XP or Kanban or roll your own. And I was looking, and Scrum, even though it maybe wasn't practiced consistently across the community, was the most popular. At least the nouns were anyway. People were standing up and had product backlogs and all that. So David Starr kind of introduced me to that, in the mid 2000s, and I went full steam ahead on learning and teaching Scrum and TFS, now Azure DevOps. That brings me up to date.
Yeah, you threw out a lot of acronyms: ALM, SDLC. DevOps is kind of like it's a smushed word, but so software development lifecycle, it doesn't get talked about so much in that terms anymore. And then ALM, application lifecycle management, that used to be talked about a lot more. Also, even a couple decades ago, there's another one, SCM, software configuration management. That acronym got, but it seems like the problem is the same. What's your take on it? That people, they want to move fast,
yes,
and then they want to make sure that the software works. And it's like we go with these acronyms, but are we ever going to solve this problem?
There's another thing called CASE. Remember that one back in the 90s? Computer assisted software engineering.
Unfortunately,
or something.
I do.
People have been looking for this potion, this holy grail of development, where the tool's going to solve the problems. And as you and I both know, as you read in my bio, it's not the tools or the processes that do the work; it's the people. And if anything, and I'm really harsh on the tools in my book, tools can drive us apart. For example, rather than pairing up or mobbing or even doing an in-person code review, people have gotten really comfortable with the pull request. I make a change, I create a pull request, I add some people in there to review it. And it is a great feedback mechanism when you're dislocated as a team. But gosh, if you've got the opportunity to pair up even in video like this and code using, Live Share in Visual Studio or something else, why not? Why not have that real-time high fidelity conversation, lower the risk and go faster like you're talking about? But no, we want tools. We want to be able to buy that velocity, and it's just not going to happen.
Yeah. So it's you're writing a new book. What's the gist? Why do we need a new book? Give us high points.
So in 2012, I wrote a book which was basically the intersection of Professional Scrum, which, just to catch you up, those of you listening, there is Scrum according to the Scrum Guide. You can go to scrumguides.org and download the Scrum Guide in any of 30 languages, and that explains the framework and the rules of Scrum. But then scrum.org, we've added on top of that additional scaffolding, if you will, to inculcate what we call Professional Scrum. And that's Scrum according to the Scrum Guide, plus living the Scrum values. So, courage, commitment, openness, focus, and respect. And I talk about those extensively in my book, but also just, an adherence to the inspection and adaptation at all the points in Scrum. So you're constantly inspecting and improving the how, the process, how the team works, inspecting and improving the what. So we wrap that up and call that Professional Scrum. It's more than just mechanical or zombie Scrum or dark Scrum, as it's been called out there, but we put that extra definition on top of it for Professional Scrum. And my book back in 2012, I unfortunately tied it to Visual Studio 2012 because there wasn't really a good term for the backend tools. I mean, I could have said Professional Scrum with Team Foundation Server 2012, but Visual Studio was sort of the broad sort of marketing product name for that whole suite. And Jeffrey, you've been a Visual Studio wonk for years. That is the only version all the way back, all the way forward that only lasted 1 year. Back in the 90s, we had, the 90, was it 98 or VB6, Visual Studio 6. It went to, 2003, 2005, 2008, 2010, 2012, and then boom, 13.
13.
And then they've been 15. On the odd years ever since. So I tied my title of the book to something that lasted essentially 9 months.
Seems like an easy second edition. Well, maybe not all the screenshots there.
Right. So, and the nice thing is I delayed that exact thinking for like 8 years. And the good news is I've evolved a lot of my thinking around how professional Scrum team can work. The Scrum Guide's gone through a few changes. We no longer say commit to the work. We say forecast, some things like that. We don't prioritize the backlog. We order the backlog. And some of these things sound like very nuanced, Well,
no, these are important. I think that there's a lot of people who got initial Scrum orientation. Even if they didn't go through a whole course, they were somehow oriented in Scrum, even if it was just in their organizations when Scrum was really on the uptick, which was a huge Scrum growth. That was over 10 years ago now. And so I think maybe a lot of people think, oh yeah, I know Scrum, but it's 15 years old knowledge. Can you give us an update on the current Scrum Guide, what is Scrum in 2020?
Sure. Yes. So in fact, there will be a Scrum Guide update in 2020. I can't say exactly when it's going to be published, but if anything, each time Ken and Jeff, that would be Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland, the co-creators of Scrum, whenever they go through the Scrum Guide, they really try hard to make it smaller, like make it more of a framework and less of a methodology, more of a framework, less of a process. So it is very abstract. You can't read the Scrum Guide and figure out how to do Scrum. It's just the rules and the framework, and then you'll add in your own complementary practices like story points or planning poker or standing up if you're doing your daily Scrum, or sitting down if you're doing the daily Scrum, or planking if you're going to do the daily Scrum. It doesn't describe how to do the daily Scrum, just the purpose of it and the time boxing of it. So because it's always been a framework, people have, I don't want to say abused it, because sometimes you can abuse the Scrum framework and still deliver value quickly. And that's great. That's what we're trying for here. But there's also a lot of people just reading the Scrum Guide and just saying, okay, we're going to stand up every day for 15 minutes. We're going to go around the circle. Everyone's going to read their JIRA ticket to each other. No one's going to listen or care. And then we're going to go back and continue working as individuals. So it is a team-based sport. As you know, software development at a scale like that, it's team-based sport. You want to bring all these people together with their different backgrounds, different skill sets. Some of them have specialties in coding. Some of them have specialties in design, UI, UX, testing, architecture, content development, the whole gambit. Mm-hmm. Well, in Scrum, we require a cross-functional team. We need those different skill sets to be able to deliver done working software. But people maybe are allergic to working with each other. They don't have that courage. They don't have that openness. So they end up taking a ticket or a product backlog item and maybe doing most of the work on their own. So if anything, this book is an updated reminder of it's not the tools and it's not Scrum that makes this happen. It's the people. And I spend long chapters getting into ways of working that are promoting that as opposed to destroying it. I've come up with some terms: hoarding, hogging, specializing, and generalizing are 4 kind of dysfunctional ways of working. Hoarding would be, for example, I'm going to, at the start of the sprint, take these 4 or 5 user stories and just go over in my corner and do all of the work and maybe or maybe not get them done by the end of the sprint. Hogging would be, I'll take one at a time, work it, and when I'm done, I'll go back and take the next one and work it. Specializing would be, I'm just going to go through and do all the C# coding stuff, or I'm the tester, I'm going to go through and do all the testing stuff. Generalizing might be, I've got, some more skill sets, but still I'm not going to work with others in pairs or swarms or mobs. And honestly, that's where you want to arrive, is being able to pair with people so you can learn from each other, check each other's work, or swarm, have the team, work on that entire item the whole way through until it's done, and go to the next piece of work.
Okay.
For the Kanban folks out there, it's bringing that work in progress limit down to like a 1, and having 1 column on the board says development. Not easy stuff to do.
Well, speaking of that, and with DevOps, there's so much focus on cycle time speed. and asking the question, okay, if I get a request to make some type of change, is it possible that can make it to production today or make it to production tomorrow, versus next week, next month, next quarter? And so in those types of environments with Scrum in 2020, does Scrum fit, or how does Scrum fit in an organization that really does want that insanely short cycle time all the way through to production?
That's a really good question. Scrum has kind of people will look at it and think there's some overhead around it. I've got to work in these 2-week sprints, and I've got to do this planning and that. What it doesn't do is exclude the option to continuously deliver to production. So if you do plan out a 2-week sprint and you pull in these 10 items you're going to work on as a team, if the team gets item number 1 done according to their definition of done within a day or two, which is fantastic, they can push it to production. Feature flags or not, they can push that out. Some people get caught up with the sprint review and say, oh, the sprint review is where you have to Caesar vote, the PBI being done or not, and release it. We will release this item right now. No, you can have things released before sprint review. Sprint review is just an opportunity for the stakeholders to inspect the done work. And what a better way to inspect it than in production, maybe with some actual telemetry. So Scrum does not exclude continuous delivery. But that said, if to take your question a little further, if the next piece of work is not known, we're dealing with a lot of unplanned work. The next bug fix, the next operational fix, the next small customization job, and we don't have a backlog of that stuff that's out far enough to plan even a sprint, then having some kind of a flow model might be better. And Kanban practices would definitely work at that point.
So if someone did adopt a flow model, does that mean that they wouldn't be doing Scrum, or does Scrum fit nice with flow as well?
Both of those are valid choices. You can have a flow model like Kanban, have a Kanban board and monitor your work in progress and set the limits and the policies and in retrospect on all that. That's great. That's still agile, as long as you do take the opportunity to retrospect. That's one thing I've observed Kanban teams over the years. They just put their current team dysfunction up on the wall with all of those columns and handoffs. And I even heard of columns where the pull request was created, and then there's another column for the pull request was accepted. It's like, oh no, you've got that level of stuff on there. I know, right? As long as the team stops now and then and says, how can we collapse this? How can we make some institutional improvements with our team to essentially shorten the cycle time? Scrum has that built in, which is what I love about Scrum. It's an inspect and adapt. It's an empirical framework every turn. Yes, working inside of the sprint, time box can make it a little weird for the Kanban teams. But having a sprint goal, having the daily Scrum to focus on the plan for the day, having the review and the retrospective as events that you have to do, I think that's all good. I think those are the things missing from Kanban. And in fact, there's a Kanban guide for Scrum teams that Scrum.org published. It was created by a couple Kanban experts out there and some Scrum trainers. And it shows exactly how to do that, how to treat Kanban as nothing more than a complementary practice that you can run inside the Scrum framework.
Okay, awesome. So just keeping going on modern Scrum, because so many people's orientation is so long ago. Are there still roles in Scrum? And what are the current roles?
Yeah, there are still roles in Scrum. There's 3 roles. There's the product owner role, and the product owner is all about maximizing the value of the product that's being developed and delivered. There's the development team role, and this is the team within the team. This role, or these developers, if you will, there's usually 3 to 9 of them. You're looking for a Scrum team that's got 10 people or less, roundabout. You don't want to have 15 people on a Scrum team. You also don't want to have 2. Mm-hmm. So somewhere in there, and honestly, teams that tend to be a little smaller tend to be a little more agile. There's less communication, less dependencies across the team. but you also need to have people that have all the skills in a lesser amount of people. So you've got the product owner role. They kind of define and own the what is being developed. You've got the developers who define and own the how. So the coding, are we going to buy? Are we going to build it? Are we going to go get it from GitHub and customize it? And then you've got the Scrum Master. And the Scrum Master is essentially the person that looks after the process. They're the ones who make sure that the Scrum framework is understood, time boxes are kept, people understand the rules. It's kind of a coach at times, facilitator, trainer, consultant, if you will. And some of their time is spent with the organization. If you were to start a Scrum team, form it today, the Scrum Master role would be focused a lot on helping this Scrum team grow and understand the rules, and not touch the hot stove and things like that. But over time, maybe requires less attention, and that Scrum Master can then turn their attention to another team or to the organization as a whole. Because I'll tell you, Jeffrey, that's the thing that I see cause Scrum teams to falter more often is not the team, it's the organization. Yes, we're, mega bank incorporated and we want agile because we want to go faster and make more money and crush our competitors and all the faux promises that are out there. They don't realize the hard work that has to go into it. And I'm not just talking about writing a check for training. While I thank them for that, I need it to go much beyond that. They need to basically blow up a chunk of their organization to carve out a bubble for this experiment to happen. They need to cut all the umbilical cords from PMO, from project managers, from middle management, even, the requirements to have status reports, whatever. We just need to cut this thing out in the middle of this giant org and enable this thing to happen organically as a startup, basically.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software engineering firm and Microsoft Gold partner, empowering development teams to be their best. ClearMeasure equips developers with the DevOps tools, methods, and automation necessary to focus on building their applications, rather than wrestling with builds, deployments, or environments. Click clear-measure.com to see whether a DevOps implementation is for you.
It reminds me of the story at Toyota of the Toyota Prius, where Toyota had their normal way of doing it, but they commissioned a new dedicated team to create this this electric vehicle, essentially hybrid vehicle, and it had like no ties to the rest of the organization, and so they came out and they got the Toyota Prius. Well, lo and behold, that team wasn't even told that they commissioned a completely second team, essentially two engine teams, the drivetrain. That was the main part. They commissioned two of them and didn't tell either one about the other, and they let them self-organize in different ways, and the one that won. So they had one that actually was successful and had a great design. That became the Toyota Prius drivetrain, and the other team, it's like, okay, you didn't win. but as a company, there's like, you know what, you got to complete it. It was an interesting story. Yeah,
you've got to do that. You've got to have leadership that can have the courage. Like, hey, if we want this promise, and I would if it was me, being a guide for them, I would have rephrased that a little bit so that they weren't expecting miracles. But if you want this, there's got to be a ton of work on their side to redesign the org. Not top to bottom, but in pieces to enable this to happen. And that's the thing, Jeffrey. It's the organizational antibodies, get dispatched and go seek and destroy this Scrum thing happening over here on this team because it's weird and nobody understands it. So you need Scrum Masters or coaches in there explaining to the management structure, the organization as a whole, what this is, how to let it go. Here's new ways of sort of monitoring it. Get rid of scope, schedule, and cost, as traditional management metrics, and let's go with value. Let's go with net promoter scores, things like that. More surveys of the stakeholders and the customers and the employees.
Well, you've mentioned that Scrum is a framework and not a process, and I think there's a lot of people that they would just want the process. And like you said, the daily Scrum, no longer called, whether it ever was, but the daily stand-up, because in a virtual world, I'm not standing up in front of my video camera unless I have a standing desk anyway. So, but the daily Scrum, which is, the concept is, hey, get everybody together and make sure everybody knows what they're working on and that everybody's trucking, nobody's blocked. It's like a conceptual, do this somehow. Right? That's the framework. That's why you say it's abstract. But I think that, in my observation, you correct me if I'm wrong, when we talk about the roles, of Scrum Master, if it's an abstract framework, then the role of Scrum Master is recognizing, hey, there has to be somebody or there has to be some capability of enablement in order for Scrum to work. But then people don't implement what that abstract role is going to be. They immediately assume that it's concrete and say, that means we must hire a person and their title must be Scrum Master and there must be one and they will be assigned. But it's supposed to be an abstract framework, but that sounds rather concrete. So when you go into your clients, how do you coach them on that issue, especially smaller ones that don't have teams of teams and they're like, I got 5 people. You're telling me I got to go hire somebody?
Yeah, so that is a misconception that a role equals a body. That you do have to have a body play the role, but it could be one of the development team members. So you asked me, how do I explain that when I go into a new client? And my answer is I do. I explain it that way. If I'm doing proper training, we make sure to go very, very slowly and meticulously through the discussion of roles, because the people we're talking to in that room, we're going to be eventually playing those roles. We want to get all the questions answered. We do say things like, while it's allowed that the Scrum Master can also be the product owner, we don't recommend that. Product owner, if anything, should be a single person dedicated to that role, because that is kind of a make or break role on a Scrum team. There's a lot that the product owner does. There's only one of them too. There are 3 to 9 developers, and maybe some of them have better Scrum understanding and better interpersonal skills. They might want to take the role of Scrum Master, but then realize if they're doing that sort of got to take precedent over them, writing SQL Server code or something like that. So having that dual role is possible, and it does cut down on perceived increases of headcount, but it can also take away capacity of the team, which I think is fine. I think in the early stages of a Scrum team, you're not going to know what your capacity is. So essentially, if one of the developers is also playing the role of a Scrum Master, then they're going to have less capacity, which I think is fine. I think that in the early stages of a new team adopting Scrum, they don't know what their capacity is. They might look at it and say, well, we've got 5 people, 2-week sprints, there's 400 hours of work. And if they continue working the way they've always done, they're going to get what they've always gotten for those 400 hours, which is first of all, probably only 200 hours of productivity, and then a bunch of unfinished work at the end of the sprint. But if we can just show them new ways of working, which again, I go back to my book, because my collaboration chapter talks about, pairing, swarming, and mobbing. And even though it will look like, what, you're wasting 2 or 3 or all, 5 of these people in a group doing one thing at a time, you're cutting down our 400 by, 1/5 right there. Well, that's why we don't want managers with that kind of thinking to be directly observing and influencing the team, because what the team is doing is they're getting work done. I will always ask managers, which do you value more, output or outcome? And they're, well, what, the good ones will be like, what do you mean? I said, well, do you value everybody puts in their 40 hours a week, or would you value them getting items and features and bug fixes done and deployed? Oh yeah, that second part, definitely. I don't really care about the hours. We want the outcome. Okay, so what if you were to see your best person, your senior lead developer, your times 10 developer, if they exist, sitting around, coaching, pairing up, wandering around, just doing support work with the other team members. But yet at the sprint reviews, you're getting lots and lots of items done. Oh no, I don't want Brent, I'll use the name from the Phoenix project. I don't want Brent, quote unquote, on the bench all the time. I want Brent, at a keyboard all the time. It's like, well, whoa. You just said you value outcome over output. And we're demonstrating that having Brent help and pair up and be part of the swarm increases the outcomes, not the output. So this is hard for them to see because it's on faith in the beginning. And then over time, they still might go back to those muscle memory of must manage according to timesheet, and that's an impediment.
And it seems like good managers do this kind of thought process and organization process because they're good managers.
Exactly.
So how does all this new tech fit in here? Like cloud changing a bunch of stuff, and shoot, nobody's co-located. Not nobody. Very few people are co-located in this past quarter. If they're in regular, cubicle or closed office environment. So you got kind of like tech shifts, and now you got environment shifts. How are you seeing people continuing to be successful adapting to these types of changes?
Sure. And this has been hard for me because I'm a co-located kind of person and co-located thinker. And the way I've always described it and continue to describe it is if you can get the whole Scrum team, product owner, developers, everybody, I'm talking in the same room at the same time with a similar culture, I call that a coefficient of friction of 0.0. So that team is able to do the most, outcome possible. As you pull one team member away 4 hours a day to go do something else, as you put the product owner in a room down the hall, as you have people, doing 4 10s instead of 5 8s or whatever, you're upping your coefficient of friction. You're adding extra overhead on. Oh, I'm ready to go do this. I got a dependency. Oh, that person's not here. Oh, I need to go to the whiteboard right now with the product owner. Oh, they're down the hall and in a meeting. So it's kind of impossible to quantify this friction. It's a unicorn. You can't really describe it, but as I go through this narrative, you'll understand what I'm saying. And then boom, starting in March, the whole work from home thing basically put those coefficient of frictions in double digits. Now, people will disagree and say, no, we can be on Zoom or Teams or whatever and be just as productive. I'm like, can you? It's impossible to quantify in the first place. Productivity, it's another unicorn. How can you be just as productive? Well, our velocity hasn't gone down. Well, or did you just futz with the story points? It's hard to know. But back to your point, we are in this situation and we are in work from home and we don't know how long that's going to be. So yes, we have to rely on tools. Cloud tools are fantastic. I've always been a fan of Azure DevOps services, Microsoft's, Azure cloud hosted Team Foundation server. Now it's been renamed, as you know, to Azure DevOps. And it's a great way for a Scrum team to plan and manage their work using Azure boards, as well as repos. And GitHub works just great too. Pipelines to do all the builds. I know you are definitely a pipeline wonk, so I don't want to step into that territory. You know all about that.
Yeah, but you can't be married to tools either.
You can't be married to tools. No, I mean they will facilitate and more so in times of dislocated teams.
But there's going to be some better tools in a few years.
There's always going to be better tools, something shinier, something that promises this. And I just tell teams in your retrospectives, that's a great point of time to push back from the code and push back from the product and talk about the how, and say, hey, there are these things out there like the online story mapping tools. There's these murals. There's these online tools maybe not built into Azure DevOps. Should we try them? Should we do an experiment for a few sprints? And I suggest that with every tool. Treat it like any experiment. Adopt it, try it, give it a period of time. Whatever that mileage looks like will vary from team to team. And then inspect, do we want to keep it? Do we want to drop it? Do we want to try something else? Increase it, decrease it?
Well, let's end on estimating, because that is a huge. I mean, there's still planning poker cards that are being sold online, and but of course then the Kanban people will say, why are you estimating? Just count. And so does the latest Scrum guide specify that you even do estimating, or is that a relic of ancient past?
So I'm going on the 2017 Scrum Guide because the 2020 Scrum Guide is not out yet. And the 2017 Scrum Guide does mention estimate, that each item in the backlog has an estimate. It does not specify story points or Fibonacci or planning poker. Those are all complementary practices that a team can use or not use. And there's also suggestion at the sprint review that the product owner gives sort of a timeline estimate on when, features might be released. So it's basically, as part of the sprint review, the product owners, allowing the stakeholders to inspect the release plan. And release plans are estimates. We estimate we will get this giant feature you guys want out by the 1st of October, for example. Beyond that, the Scrum Guide doesn't get into the how of estimating. And my personal take is whatever technique you're going to use, affinity estimation, wall estimation, planning poker, online planning poker, planning pinochle. No, that doesn't really work, does it? Those are just the big cards. It's not about the number. It's about the conversation. It's about the learning. Mm-hmm. So if you put the team together with some planning poker cards or a planning poker app on their phone, it's about the shared understanding of the work. And the fact that you boil that down to an 8, which doesn't mean anything, just simply means that you've kind of come to a consensus or a shared understanding. This is maybe a little bit larger than our standard medium-sized piece of work. The danger, of course, is to convert any of those magic numbers into hours or implied plans or implied budgets or implied, promises or commitments. We want to avoid that. So again, that goes back to the organizational training that, hey, estimates are by the developers, for the developers. Stay away from those numbers. Don't try to convert them to hours or money. Just inspect what we do at each review and be happy about that. You mentioned Kanban, though, because in the last couple of years, my eyes have really been opened to some of those flow metrics. Whether you're using a Kanban board or whether you can generate these metrics off a task board, which I believe you can. No one's done it yet, though. Teams are able to track their cycle time from the moment they begin working on an item to the moment it gets done, whatever that looks like, to release or ready to be released. They can try experiments to shorten those cycle times. But what's neat is they can look back over a period of time, like let's look over the last 6 sprints. Maybe we've done 80 different items of different sizes. You can, using probability, come up with, using something like Monte Carlo estimation techniques. Say, with a 85% probability, we can finish any piece of work in 6 days or less. With a 95% probability, we can finish any piece of work in 11 days or less. And that's just using our team, our environment, our complexity, our work.
Your track record.
Our track record, our empirical data by us. And if we don't change those things, then we can assume that, hey, the next time a stakeholder says, when's my thing going to be done? We can say, well, with an 85% probability, we can have your thing done 11 days after we start it. With a 75%, or you can give them the numbers. And I like that. That's really neat. There's some tools out there. Maybe we can put it in the show notes that plug into Azure DevOps and will help, generate these numbers. We'll run the Monte Carlo simulations and all of that for you. Yeah,
let's put those URLs in the show notes. 2006, I think I became a certified Scrum Master, and then and I've helped a lot of clients with Scrum. I've always taken mixed in a lot of the extreme programming practices and test-driven development, but lately I've been focused a lot on architecture practices as enablement, and I've become a big fan of estimation by decomposition. And so, like Scrum says, you got to have an estimate. It doesn't specify what technique you have. But and I say estimating by decomposition because I found that if you ask somebody to estimate something, you get numbers that are all over the place. And yeah, you can use a law of large numbers by taking everybody's estimate and averaging together, and it'll be, better than in any individual one. But if you're on a team of 2 or 3, small teams, like, okay, whose estimate do you believe? One guy says, I can have it done tomorrow. Another person's like, it's going to take 2 weeks. And so, but what I found was estimating by decomposition eliminates the items that are unestimatable, because you don't even understand what it is enough to decompose it into the things that you have to do in order to make it happen. Whereas if it's, we need another report. Well, we've done 50 reports just like it. It's just another report. Oh, okay. Well, there's one thing to do because we have a framework in place, all that. But if it's something that's this new thing, there's analysis and design that has to be done to even validate that you understand the requirements. And so it helps to kind of separate and say, we got to leave this in the backlog column because we still don't even understand what the heck this is to even have a plan of how we're going to do it. But if I can decompose it, I got to do these 5 things. If I do these 5 things, this thing is done. So a quote 5 is, it's got 5 things that have to be done. Whereas this other thing has 2 things. This other thing has 15 things that we have to do in order to get it done. So your unit of estimating kind of becomes concrete because you've broken it down into that number of items. So I've become a fan of that general approach because it gets a lot of the personality and experience and capability out. And it's like, it has an objectivity to it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I hadn't heard of that before, but it goes back to, it's not really the number. It's about taking the time to understand and have a shared understanding of what the work looks like. And the 15 things sounds like to me, you've got kind of a mental model as a team, what the plan is for delivering that thing. And the fact that it has 15 parts means it's going to take more time than the thing that has 3 parts.
Yeah.
So guess what? You've checked the box in both sides. You've got an estimate according to the Scrum Guide. You got a number you can put into Azure DevOps if you want to track it and determine ROI and all that. Now you know kind of what the investment's going to be. But more importantly, your team has gone through these refinement sessions, spending lots of time at whiteboards and things like that to come up with the 15 things. And that's the big part. That's the part that I'm happy to hear about.
Well, we're excited about the 2020 Scrum Guide. Maybe later on this year, perhaps. We don't know, I guess. At some point.
Don't know. Might be sooner than later, but it shouldn't be too shocking. I know that there's been a push to get it outside of software development. Every new version tries to make it more and more general. Complex work is not just software. Software is complex work, but there's lots of other complex work out there. So trying to distance itself a bit from the Agile Manifesto, which says right there, software development, and making it more of a framework for any kind of complex work or complex services.
Gotcha.
You might see some of that in there.
Okay. All right. We'll look forward to it. Well, Richard, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hey, you're welcome, Jeffrey, anytime.
And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.